Story 1. I am not schizophrenic. It is the Holy Spirit and God's angels. It turns out I was schizophrenic. Who would have guessed? Story 2. My father is a priest and told me when I was a teenager that he would rather I become addicted to drugs than have sex before marriage. Story 3. I believed my terminally ill dad would recover if I prayed for him enough. As a child, I had faith, but I failed to convince God to save him. It was a heavy failure to face. Moreover, the person who made such statements single-handedly undermined all the work my mom had done to help me understand that my dad was going to die. That was not what any of us needed. The hardest part is how long it took me to realize how troubling that situation was. It happened 20 years ago, and I'm still not over it. Story 4. It could not be that bad if God allowed it. This refers to my experiences of being raped repeatedly by a family member from the ages of 11 to 17. Story 5. Babies who are victims of rape are part of God's plan, according to a local conservative politician who stated this to me and about 200 other demonstrators. Story 6. 4 years ago, I was in a horrific car accident with my children. Thankfully, everyone survived. My daughter was severely injured, unconscious, and needed surgery. My son was physically okay but still suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. After the accident, many religious family members and friends tried to comfort me by explaining that God had a plan and that this was part of it to make us stronger. My child almost died. Did God hurt her so badly to make us stronger? Story 7. I attended a friend's father's funeral about 20 years ago. The priest loudly told the packed chapel that he was a bad man and that he would go to hell. Story 8. The only word they said to me was faggot, as they waved a gun at me and tried to run me off the road for having a rainbow flag on my bumper. I assumed from the giant cross on the back of their truck that they were overly religious, but I didn't stick around to find out. Story 9. Someone told me that the man who abused me when I was 12, my stepfather, would go to heaven because he accepted Jesus Christ as his savior, but I was going to hell because I had not accepted Jesus. Even if she believed it, she didn't really need to tell me. Story 10. If I ever decide to cut or even trim my hair, I will face consequences for damaging my appearance and making myself look less appealing to men. Story 11. My husband died young and suddenly when our twins were babies. I was told that God needed him more than we did. I responded, no, our children needed a father, and they will never know him. Story 12. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that. Story 13. I, a woman, am an affront to God because I have chosen not to have children. This was said loudly at work in the cafeteria in front of 100 other people by one of the company owners. Story 14. An acquaintance who believes in reincarnation asked me what terrible things my mom must have done in a previous life to deserve the awful experiences she was facing in this one. I wanted to punch him. Story 15. My mom had just died. She was a Jehovah's Witness, and I was beginning to doubt the religion. My mom's best friend told me that I'd better not leave the organization if I wanted to see my mom again. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Armageddon could happen any day now, and only baptized, believing active members will survive. God will destroy everyone else. That was the context. Story 16. My lupus is a punishment for my biological parents having conceived me in sin, which is a complicated issue. Story 17. I was told that my illness was God's retribution for choosing to be gay and that I deserved it. Story 18. If I wore a two-piece swimsuit and a man lusted after me, he might then go and assault someone, and it would be partially my fault. I was around 12 when I was told this. I also grew up believing we were living in the end times. I literally thought I wouldn't make it to adulthood, so that was pretty rough. Story 19. After many rounds of fertility treatments, I finally became pregnant, but experienced a miscarriage at 11 weeks. A religious coworker hugged me when I returned to work and said, "This is what happens when we try to force God's hand." I was speechless. Story 20. The teacher who saved the lives of 30 children in the Sandy Hook shooting faced immense challenges because she deceived the gunman, ultimately protecting the kids. Story 21. I proposed a psychological research hypothesis to my team about the obsolescence of romantic artificial intelligence bots being negatively correlated with maladaptive expressions of mental health disorders online. Someone from my team commented that it was evil and suggested I had a darkness in me. I pushed back, emphasizing that those who need help the most are often demonized and, as a mental health advocate, we must keep an open mind. I dropped the topic and even supported the idea they proposed without issue, but they continued to harass me, eventually yelling at me in front of others. They accused me of being a liar and a deceiver, claiming I had darkness, which deeply affected me. The situation escalated to the point that my team collectively decided this person was not a good fit. Later, they reported me to the Department for Discrimination. A year later, this article was published. This is a highly important topic and a problem we will encounter more frequently unless it is addressed immediately. I don't care how much darkness I have in me. Mental health is my priority. Story 22. Because my parents hadn't baptized me, I would definitely be burning in hell for all eternity. The priest then described in graphic detail what hell is like. I was 6 years old. Story 23. He agreed that conversion therapy was torture but said that I deserved to be subjected to 1.5 years of it as a minor. He claimed he would do the same to his children if they ever came out. He also stated that Lot's daughters getting him drunk and assaulting Lot is morally correct because it was necessary, while gay sex is a horrible sin. It's been a while since I last read Genesis, but I am fairly certain the daughters did that on their own. They weren't instructed to assault their father by God. The Bible doesn't explicitly criticize them, but it doesn't explicitly praise them either. Story 24. My father died at home after a long battle with cancer. I was just a child, but it was very difficult. About a month before he passed away, we had new neighbors, an elderly couple who were involved in the Salvation Army. We only saw them in passing. On the night my father died, they arrived at our doorstep with a group of friends, forced their way inside, and insisted on leading us in prayer. My siblings and I didn't know how to respond. We weren't a religious family even before my dad became unwell, so we looked to our mother. She allowed them to proceed, either out of politeness, exhaustion, or feeling overwhelmed. They then told everyone in the neighborhood how they had provided us comfort in our hour of need. I have never forgiven them for their intrusion. They made a painful situation worse. This was over 30 years ago, and I still hold on to those feelings. Story 25. My wife's grandmother, who was a born-again Christian, said to me after finding out that my mom died, "Good, now your dad can see what it's like to be alone." I was trying to get home from North Carolina to the Pacific Northwest. It was so bitter. Story 26. God will punish you for being with my daughter, said my ex's mother, who was a Christian and didn't like that I turned down her advances when I was 15. She was nice and sweet to me until the day I said, "I'm with your daughter. I can't." Everything after that was just emotional abuse from her. Story 27. The statement that the Jews deserve the Holocaust because they rejected Christ is deeply offensive and historically inaccurate. I did not end up attending that individual's church. Story 28. That God doesn't give you more than you can handle. I was going through a period of severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, and I was questioning why God would give someone obsessive-compulsive disorder. I was 16 years old at the time. Story 29. If I didn't return to his church, he would break my arm. I was about 15 and never went back since the girl I was trying to impress wasn't interested. Story 30. I attended a Baptist wedding, which should have been joyful. We are often told that non-believers will face dire consequences. I do not believe that, so I will confront the person behind the pulpit in the afterlife. Story 31. My uncle shot himself when he was 33. At his funeral, some women were chatting and said he was in hell. I have never wanted to confront someone so strongly. Story 32. Honestly, I don't have a real problem with religious people. However, my friend once invited me to his youth group, and the guest that night was apparently the local police officer. He expressed his wish to pull over and arrest everyone he saw with a Darwin fish on their car, and everyone clapped. I was about to stand up because I actually had a Darwin fish on my car in the parking lot, but my friend pulled me down with a "not now" vibe. so I sat back and daydreamed for the rest of the meeting. It was shocking to witness a law enforcement official express a desire to enforce personal beliefs by law, while a room full of people agreed with him. Story 33. You should not take birth control pills because preventing pregnancy is a sin. A baby should be seen as a gift from God. These were the words of a female gynecologist. I requested to be referred to someone else immediately after that appointment. Story 34. It was suggested that God has a plan and reason for everything after my grandfather's passing. I was forced to stay the night with my grandmother in the house shortly afterward, sleeping just one room away from where it occurred. In the middle of the night, she shared the details of that night with me. I was only around 12 or 13 when this happened and was already struggling with severe depression and thoughts of self-harm. Story 35. A lady at my mother's church told her that my 12-year-old brother's death from cancer was punishment for an abortion she had several years earlier. I could see it hurt my mom deeply by the way she recounted this story. There are some truly heartless people out there. Story 36. My uncle, who took his own life due to post-traumatic stress disorder from serving in Afghanistan, went to the lowest level of heaven because he felt unworthy of reaching the highest level. I walked out of that Sunday school class and never returned to church. Story 37. That my disabled child was a gift sent to earth to teach others a lesson and was only given to me because I could handle so much, and it was part of a divine plan to make him disabled to teach me and others a significant lesson about grace. And no, he could not have First Communion because it was not possible for disabled children to understand the idea of transubstantiation. He is 2 years ahead of his grade in school and absolutely understands the theory, as his mother has 2 degrees in theology. I asked the person telling me this to explain to me how transubstantiation worked, and they could not. We quit the Catholic Church shortly thereafter. But not until I demanded to know if the Holocaust was part of the divine plan and exactly how disabled a child had to be for God to use them to teach other people lessons, and why God chose to cause children pain in order to teach unkind adults lessons. Local priests do not know how theodicy works and are not prepared for these questions. Story 38. If I hadn't been so careless and had kept my legs closed, I wouldn't need assistance to keep my baby and me from freezing. I was 16 with an infant on my own. This happened in a Southern Baptist church in rural Oklahoma 30 years ago. Story 39. If a person who is in the country illegally takes their critically ill baby to an emergency room, the baby should be treated and not left to die. Story 40. My mother died that morning in the early hours. I met a friend for coffee later, and he told me that she was going to hell. Story 41. I will provide you with a single 30-day prescription for an antidepressant, because it is required by law. However, the truth is that you need more quality time with Jesus. Let us all pray together. After that, I stopped going to regular doctor visits and refused any treatments my family suggested because I knew they would be faith-based and deny scientific evidence, which led to a significant decline in my well-being. Story 42. It was God's design for my best friend's mom to get cancer. She had quit the day before and we worked at the same place. This was said to me by my employer, who had no problem taking advantage of teenagers as God intended. Story 43. My family converted to Mormonism when I was a teenager. Fast forward 25 years, and we were all out except for my sister, who stayed active. She died of cancer at 41 and left 4 children. An old childhood friend's mother called me, and I thought she was calling to offer her condolences. She was an evangelical Christian. I was telling her how devastated my parents were, and she said, "If one of my children died, I'd be fine because I know they'd be in heaven." I was furious. That was 25 years ago, and I'm still upset that I didn't say anything back to her. Story 44. When I was a student, I was walking across campus when a religious person pointed at me and shouted, "You're going to hell." I asked him if he was taking a group down right now. Story 45. Evolution is a misconception. Conduct your own research. The joke is on them. I conduct my own research, which is why I believe in it. Story 46. That family with the child who died from cancer experienced this tragedy because the parents did not pray diligently enough. Story 47. I was told to fear God and that I would burn in hell. Sadly, the old man died a year later. What good is a deity and their followers if they cannot handle criticism? Story 48. A friend of mine committed suicide because I didn't pray enough for him, and people who commit suicide go to a place worse than hell. The person who told me this was associated with multiple churches in the area, and I had known him for several years prior. He was the catalyst for my falling away from my church and religion altogether. Story 49. I learned an old Air Force buddy had committed suicide. I was still in shock when I mentioned it to my workout partner. His first words were, "Well, he's going to hell." Story 50. My estranged aunt told doctors that my mom couldn't have a blood transfusion because she was a Jehovah's Witness. We didn't even know our eccentric aunt was a Jehovah's Witness or how she found out about the surgery. The surgeon canceled the surgery while my mom was under anesthesia. It took 9 months to get another scheduled time for the procedure. Story 51. My marriage will never be real, and my future child will never be accepted to heaven because I am not Catholic, but my husband is. I have been Christian my whole life, started dating a Catholic, got married in a Catholic church, and when we had our child, she was baptized by a Catholic priest. She still acts like my family is going to suffer eternal damnation. But whatever. Story 52. When my mom was going through some difficulties, someone in the church said it was because I wasn't a good enough Christian. A few months later, when the youth pastor saw me and asked why I wasn't attending Sunday service, I told him he didn't blame me for not going. Story 53. Non-religious people deserve equal rights. During a philosophy class, I stood up and expressed my views passionately. Story 54. I was told that being raped was my fault and a punishment from God for not being an obedient daughter and a good Catholic. Later, I was told it was the Lord's blessing in disguise because when I went to the doctor afterward, they found a very localized amount of cervical cancer at an early stage. They were able to remove most of it with a biopsy and then cut out the remaining portion with only one more procedure. Subsequent testing and checkups over 4 more years confirmed that they had removed it all, and it did not come back. I was later asked if all of that had renewed my faith, questioning how I could not believe in God after such experiences. To this day, I don't know how I managed to refrain from reacting violently towards them. Story 55. I was told by a very religious person that dinosaurs and prehistoric animals do not exist. It is not helpful to say that to an aspiring paleontologist. Story 56. A member of my childhood church told me during a prayer circle that one day all my family would be gone, and I would be alone, with only Jesus Christ by my side. I should give my life to him and accept him in my heart. I was 7 or 8 years old at the time. It was my first moment of understanding what death truly was, and I was terrified for a long time. I'm sure it still affects me today. Story 57. When Catholic leaders molest children, it is not their fault. It is demons acting for them since they are so close to God. Story 58. I don't even know what the person was saying, but he was yelling through a megaphone at 8 a.m. in front of the courthouse while I was stuck in line trying to go to jury duty. It just made a bad situation even worse. Story 59. My former in-laws are Jehovah's Witnesses. I used to create large artworks at Burning Man and was particularly proud of our 2018 installation. I encouraged my in-laws to take a look, but the father called me a heathen and told me I would be judged when my time came. That sentiment still gives me the creeps. Story 60. If a woman behaves or dresses a certain way, she deserves to be sexually assaulted. This was said by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and my young daughter and niece were within earshot. The amount of restraint I had to summon was superhuman. Story 61. I was confused because I didn't have a good enough relationship with God. Perhaps it was the lady who told me it was impossible to be fulfilled because that's what women were made for. We aren't supposed to enjoy it, but we are expected to give men whatever they want. I have worried about her 3 daughters ever since I left the church. Story 62. The Lord never gives us more than we can handle. On the evening of the day I had been working with the child protection team, I encountered a child who had been sexually assaulted the previous night and needed to be examined. I walked away because if I said anything, I didn't know whether I would start crying, scream at the person about my day, or react violently and tell them to cope with it. Story 63. People who have Down syndrome will not be judged for their understanding of sin and repentance. When I was a child, I asked whether my sister would go to heaven. Story 64. I went to church with my friend for the first time. It was a Pentecostal church. Everyone was rolling around on the floor and speaking in tongues. The preacher walked straight up to me with a trash can and told me to spit out my demons. True story. Story 65. My selfless, loving, brilliant, and kind neighbor, who passed away from pancreatic cancer, did not die because of any punishment from God for being gay. Story 66. I don't deserve life because I was an in vitro fertilization baby. I can generally brush off religious criticisms because I am Catholic and have my own faith to follow, but crossing the in vitro fertilization line is not only an insult to me, but to my parents, as it was literally the only way they could conceive a child at that time. Story 67. That all women are second-class citizens to men and their purpose is to serve them, and that they need to submit to all authority figures and their husbands. Like, girl, you've been brainwashed. Story 68. I am really impressed with how you carry yourself. You are better than me. Too bad you are going to hell, said my Catholic aunt, because I dared to question the religion. Story 69. My grandparents on my father's side told me I was disgusting, that I would burn in hell, and that someone should just kill me and all the other gay individuals. Story 70. I can heal you from God's wrath. He is punishing you for evil, but I can cleanse you. Let me pray for you so Jesus can heal and fix you. Repent of your sins and be healed. I'm in a wheelchair and hear comments like this all the time. My response is always, does God make mistakes? Head shake, no. Then no, thank you. I was born this way, so God must have had a plan. You don't want to go against his plan, do you? I get to see things in ways you never will. Then I drive away, preferably over their toes. Truthfully, I'm not religious, but I found this response works better than telling them to leave me alone. Story 71. Religious individual. If you're not religious, how do you know not to harm others? Me. What do you mean? Harm others. Religious individual. How do you morally know not to hurt others? Me. Because I don't want them to hurt me, and I treat others the way I want to be treated. Religious individual. Young man, you need to see the true greatness of our Lord. Me. If the only reason you're not hurting others is because you fear him, you need help. Story 72. My brother told my mom he is gay, and my mother got angry. My brother pointed out that the child molesting priests are worse. My mom retorted that any priest who touches a child is doing God's will. But any man who lays with another man is sadistic. She needs help. Religion really distorted her sense of right and wrong. Story 73. I don't know where you all get your pastors from. My last one said that all people who aren't religious, but are unaware of the existence of God or Christianity, automatically go to heaven as long as they are good people in this life. You all need to check your churches or something because this is concerning. Story 74. Anyone who chooses a life of sodomy will face the consequences they have created for themselves, both in this life and the next. Story 75. God hates people who engage in same-sex relationships, and if you do not agree, you will go to hell as well. To which I responded in my best Huckleberry Finn voice, well, then I will go to hell. Story 76. She wouldn't take a religious studies course because she believed she would have to consider other religions as equal to Christianity. This isn't true, as the purpose of studying religion is not to generate rankings. It was unfortunate that she thought learning about different beliefs was anti-Christian. Additionally, she was Catholic, and Catholicism has produced many important scholars and intellectuals. Story 77. At 15 years old, I decided to remain a virgin until I got married. I stayed faithful and loyal to my beliefs. When I was around 17, I mentioned to the youth minister that I was still following this vow. She responded, "Wow, I didn't think you could do it." I was really hurt because now I realize I am asexual, so I never understood why she thought I would be sexually active, let alone disobey God. Story 78. It is a shame to know that someone as nice as I am is going to hell. Or maybe it was the man who saw me checking out a library book about Salem, Massachusetts, and began leaving Bibles tucked between the doors of my duplex, with sticky notes on passages like, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Story 79. Being homosexual is considered a challenge for her, as her brother has Down syndrome, and she struggles to understand how they could make Jesus cry. Story 80. Jesus doesn't love you because you became pregnant outside of marriage. This woman set her house on fire with her family inside because her husband was abusing their children, and then her sons were doing the same to their younger sisters. Instead of reporting it, she chose to burn down her house. Story 81. At my father's funeral, someone said, "I'm sorry he's going to hell since he hadn't accepted Jesus Christ, but you still have time." Story 82. You have lost everything in your life, job, spouse, apartment, family, because God is testing you. The old man could not have simply dropped a wallet in the street for me to turn in or ignore. He had to make me literally homeless, destitute, and soul-crushingly lonely. I understand. Story 83. I was visiting my sister in the hospital as she was recovering from surgery for the same benign but invasive brain tumor that I had just been diagnosed with. I know, bad luck. 2 of my mother's church friends were there. They backed me into a corner to explain that God was doing what he needed to do to bring us back into the fold. So don't backslide, because God will give you a brain tumor. Story 84. Not the worst thing, but when you are at a wake for someone who died from an overdose and they say, "Everything happens for a reason, so if I kill you now, it was God's will." Story 85. On Easter of all days, I was told I was going to burn in hell for all eternity because I did not accept Jesus Christ in my heart as the one true Savior. Story 86. Talking about the idea of a personal hell. What if hell for you is being sexually abused by your father, like in life, but forever? This came from one of the kindest, sweetest people I have ever known. I mentioned how disturbing that was, and she admitted, "Okay, yeah, that is pretty disturbing." So at least there was a small amount of awareness. Story 87. My Sunday school teacher told me the Freemasons were a satanic cult. My grandfather and uncle were prominent members of their local Masonic lodge. My mother was in their women's organization, the Order of the Eastern Star, and I had just joined their organization for girls, the Order of the Rainbow. That was the end of my attending Sunday school, along with the teacher telling me to burn my Lord of the Rings books because they would attract demons into the house. Story 88. I was a heathen who turned my uncle away from Jesus. It wasn't me. It was his hypocritical Baptist minister father. Story 89. Kanye West is a controversial figure during the first Trump era. Look at him go now. He wore swastika merchandise and a KKK uniform, and he stated that Jews are horrible and that Hitler was right. I mean, if anyone is a Nazi, it's that individual. He is the only person I've ever seen make Alex Jones uncomfortable enough to express disagreement with something outlandish. Story 90. I should incorporate Jesus into my celebration of Jewish holidays, and it isn't against Jewish law to do so. I used to receive handwritten letters at my home encouraging me to explore my relationship with Jesus, along with pamphlets suggesting ways to alter traditional Jewish rituals. Additionally, I was warned that if I did not do this, I would face eternal consequences. Story 91. That I do not have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. My brain has been affected by excessive adult content consumption. It is better to pray about it than to seek professional help. Story 92. Without the 10 Commandments and the Bible, people might not know not to murder. It seems that humans need to be told not to harm others in order to understand that. At 15, my mother and grandmother, who are Christians, held this belief, but I didn't need any commandments to understand that. This perspective about Christians unsettles me for this reason. Story 93. God had answered her prayers by causing the city council to deny the zoning request to build apartments for low-income seniors next to her husband's business, as it would have hurt property values. Story 94. A good friend told me that the son of another good friend was certainly in hell for all eternity because he died by suicide. But he was mentally ill. Surely God doesn't punish people for being sick? Life is God's gift to humans. To throw it away is to disrespect God. He made his choice. Story 95. Gay marriage is wrong. Look up Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible said to me, a person who has been in a loving, fulfilling, faithful relationship for 37 years now. Story 96. The pastor told me that women couldn't be pastors in our Lutheran church because if women were able to become pastors, men wouldn't step up to lead the church. Essentially, he implied that men are too lazy to take initiative unless compelled to do so. This is a paraphrase of his words, but it captures his meaning. At the time, I was an ambitious and intelligent 16-year-old girl. Now, at 60, I still have no desire to be a pastor. I often reflect on how troubling that response was. Story 97. I work at a Catholic school, and a priest told me that the devil once pushed him off a ladder, and he got really hurt. A week later, his father died. The devil couldn't kill me, so he went and killed my dad. Story 98. My mother, who passed away when I was 6, could see both heaven and hell. If I went to hell, she would know. She would be content to see me there, as she would understand that I deserved to be there, rather than with God and her. No one can be unhappy in heaven. This belief kept me devoted to a Christian dominionist group well into my teenage years. Story 99. If I don't support Trump, I am not a Christian because he is somehow seen as the second coming of Christ. I quit church shortly after that because I am tired of my religion being twisted and used in this way. Story 100. I could be here all day, but one thing in particular stuck with me since I was a child. Being a good and kind person doesn't get you into heaven. I was super confused as a kid that someone akin to Hitler could be in heaven if he just accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. Oh, and I remember listening to people tell my grieving grandmother, within earshot of my sister and me, that our father still went to heaven despite taking his own life. One more thing. A preacher, who was also my uncle, tried to use my father's funeral to bring people to salvation in a fire and brimstone way. It was pretty gross. I can't believe I stayed religious as long as I did. I still have to pretend when I visit family that I'm a believer because it's just much easier than the alternative. Story 101. Fairly minor, but someone once told me that women and men having a different number of ribs proves the Bible is true, which is not accurate. Story 102. She didn't tell me directly, but one time I was in the shower when my grandma's friend came to my front door unannounced. My dad answered the door, and she was there to give him information about a conversion camp and told him to let me know, even though I wasn't out to my extended family. To this day, I am very glad I was occupied when she came by, because if I had answered the door, it would have been over for her. Story 103. I spent a year in Episcopal school with my left arm belted to my body, forced to write with my right hand because otherwise I would go to hell for being left-handed. My parents went along with it. Story 104. She cured her fibromyalgia through prayer and said I could cure mine through prayer too. This was my boss. Story 105. It wasn't bad exactly, but it did put me in a really weird situation that felt uncomfortable. I had a seizure at a friend's party and had to go home, so I was waiting outside her house for my husband to pick me up. Then her friend approached and asked if she could pray for me. I said okay, thinking she would go do it privately in her own home. No, this woman took my hand and got down on her knees in front of me, gently rubbing my hand while she mumbled about God. We were outside in the dark, and it was kind of scary because I didn't know how to get her to stop. After a seizure, I was pretty disoriented and didn't know how to express my boundaries in that moment. Anyway, she did this for about 5 minutes while I waited for my husband, just mumbling and giving me a strange hand massage. I'm sure she meant well, but it turns out, "Can I pray for you?" can actually be a really uncomfortable experience. I get nervous when people ask me that now. Story 106. Oh, we don't hate the person, we just dislike the behavior. In fact, we are taught to love the individual but hate the wrongdoing. I don't think anyone labeled as the sinner in this scenario has ever felt that supposed love. Story 107. Maybe not the worst, but one of the most foolish things I was told was that a woman cannot be holy if she wears pants. Story 108. My Jehovah's Witness aunt told my other cousins, whose mother just died, "Your mother didn't go to heaven. She's in the ground. Why is that necessary?" Story 109. They believed they were superior to me because they were Latter-day Saints. They said it very matter-of-factly, making me realize that it was a chasm I would never cross in their minds, so I never tried. Story 110. When I was 13, a friend from school died of cancer. She was only 12. She happened to be Muslim. Another girl in our class told me that our deceased classmate would burn in hell for all eternity because she had not accepted Christ. I told her that any religion that would condemn a child with cancer to eternal torment was not one I wanted anything to do with. Story 111. I was not allowed to have my daughter baptized in a church because my boyfriend and I aren't married, and we were considered a bad example. That was what the priest told me. There were more comments, but I can't remember all the judgmental things he said. Needless to say, we found another church that was much more welcoming. Story 112. I was assaulted by a close friend at my grandmother's house. I finally built up the courage to tell her after I reported it to the school because he kept trying to talk to me afterward. She told me if he kills himself, it will be my fault, that God would want me to forgive him, and that we are all sinners and no sin is greater than another. Essentially, she was saying I was the same as him because I had lied about staying up late once. Story 113. I visited a doctor because I was experiencing general discomfort, low-grade fevers, and other non-specific symptoms. He informed me it was anxiety and suggested that developing a personal relationship with Jesus could help. I was admitted to the intensive care unit with septic shock later that week. Story 114. My mother. I'm Christian, so it's my duty to love my neighbor. But LGBTQ+ people should still be shot on sight. Me. Is this how you'd express your love for them? My mother. Yes. It's for their own good. Story 115. My wife and I grew up in Christian households. We were both quite active in our local church as young adults. After we got married, we struggled to have children. One day, our church friends prayed over my wife, hoping she would get pregnant. One of our close friends claimed to have a vision that my wife would conceive in August of that year. I believe it was around June at the time. This person was said to have been touched by God and had predicted many things, so we felt optimistic. August arrived, and nothing happened. My wife was devastated. It really hit her hard. That is also when I started to question my faith. Years later, we both identify as atheists and have distanced ourselves from organized religion. This might not seem that bad, but when you think about it, these people were doing something they believed was good and right. They genuinely thought that by praying for us, they were helping. The prophecy about my wife conceiving in August greatly affected her mental health and mine to a lesser extent. They gave us false hope, and it truly wrecked us for a while. Story 116. I was not informed, but at 13, I was getting baptized in the Southern Baptist Church. About a month before, an elderly black woman had started showing up with her 7 to 9-year-old grandson. No one sat by them. No one talked to them. The day we were to be baptized, he was getting baptized before me, and as I stood backstage behind a curtain, I heard the pastor and a deacon conversing about how the pool would need to be drained after this little boy got out and to watch the water beat off his head. That's the day I realized there is no God, and organized religion is just a tool to hand power to a few to control others. This contradicted everything I had been told up to that point, and I concluded it was all a deception. It enables a tax-free business, that's it. Story 117. I won't be happy if I don't serve God. Out loud, that doesn't sound too bad. But I was raised in a doomsday cult that shuns me from turning back to God and what they call the best life ever. I found my own spirituality and am quite happy with it. It just stung to have my beliefs completely invalidated once again after working hard to find a way of life that has brought me more happiness than I've ever experienced. Story 118. Not the worst, but certainly annoying. I pulled over to change a woman's tire in the middle of the night. It was God bless you, this, and thank God for good Christian men. That, and what a shame it is that people are so godless and don't want to help each other anymore the whole time. I finished changing the flat, and she offered me about $20. I told her to keep it, but if she wanted to pay me back, she could speak up if she heard any of her friends talking about godlessness and tell them about the time that an atheist was the only person who would pull over to help her. She gave me a disappointed look and said she'd pray for my soul before driving away. Story 119. As a religious person, many of these comments are troubling. I'm sorry you all have experienced these things from people who seem to have forgotten compassion. Story 120. That if God told him to kill his own son, who was hypothetical thankfully, like he did with Moses, he would do so without hesitation. Story 121. My mother-in-law called me the child of the devil for not being baptized. I thought it was funny. My mom didn't. She also claims her son is blessed by God for being a good person. Joke's on her, though. She doesn't even know her son is agnostic. My aunt told me that people who believe in evolution are wrong and are going to hell. Finally, I've been told by a couple of people trying to convert me that it's not too late. I can still save my soul and avoid hell if I just switch to the religion they represent. Story 122. Atheists cannot understand what love is because they reject the love of Jesus. I was at a rehabilitation center, and the staff knew I was an atheist. Surprisingly, the rehabilitation center did not convert me to Christianity. Story 123. Witnessed a prison chaplain say this to a juvenile in corrections. Prisoners often rolled cigarettes using paper taken from a Bible. The chaplain told the youth that he would go to hell for that and that God would not forgive him. Story 124. I was seen as the devil, and that God, through humanity, would punish me for my wicked ways. I never laughed so hard in my life. Looking back on it, it was rather creepy but still funny. Story 125. Trump's first term. A hypothetical Christian during a conversation told me we all need more religion. That's why they voted for Trump. Story 126. God doesn't have to do anything for you. My mother is a highly religious woman who has been a preacher for over 25 years at a small Pentecostal church in Oklahoma. She has had the same haircut since I was 5 years old, which is a long feathered mullet. As an atheist, I don't trust her judgment, and we don't share the same views about life. Story 127. Your immortal soul is in danger. My neighbor did not approve of the religion in which I was raised. I attempted to explain that I had left that church. Eventually, I gave up and walked away. Story 128. My teacher, right after my dog was put to sleep, told me that she was just dead and that dogs do not go to heaven. Story 129. I was chatting with a very religious person once, just making small talk, nothing wild. Out of nowhere, he told me that if I didn't believe exactly what he believed, I would burn forever. The way he said it was so casual, not angry and not even emotional. Story 130. He must atone for his sins, for we are all sinners in the eyes of the Lord, or something to that extent, during the speech of one of those individuals at my paternal grandfather's funeral. The man never harmed anyone, which made me livid. I have strong feelings against religion and Christianity in particular. Story 131. When I asked a preacher why God condones and even orders genocide in the Bible, he replied, anything God does is good because he is God. Now, genocide can never be good. Anyone who says otherwise, I do not want contact with. Story 132. My uncle said, in God's eyes, if your cousin were to go down to the corner store and steal a candy bar right now, she would be no better than Hitler. Sin is sin. My cousin is his daughter, and she was 7 years old at the time. Story 133. I used to work in a very Catholic private school, and we had Mass every Wednesday. The things the priest would say included some notable examples. 1. During Women's Day, he talked about the role women should have, which was talking but not too much. After abortion for very specific cases was approved in my country, he spent a whole hour ranting against abortion. Keep in mind, this was a Mass where at least half of the audience were children aged 10 and younger. He often talked about how he was an exorcist and told stories about devils he expelled. Children got scared, and even our very religious principal had to tell him to stop. This one was very random and weird. He was quite Caucasian, and we don't live in the United States, but one time he told us a story about traveling to the United States many years ago. He was talking to someone when suddenly Barack Obama walked by. The person he was speaking to remarked, "Look, that guy will be the next president." And his response, exactly as he said it during the Mass in a bilingual school, was, "That person, President of the United States." Yes, he did say something inappropriate. How that related to the Mass, I have no idea. The ending involved some older students, around 15 years old, who helped him with the rituals of the Mass, including delivering the sacramental bread during the communion rite. For those unfamiliar, this is a rite where people receive a thin piece of consecrated bread representing the body of Jesus, and they eat it while they pray. People form a line, and a person, either the priest or his helpers, places the bread in their mouth. One of these students made a slight movement to joke with a friend in line, pretending to give him the bread and then moving it back. A silly joke. Sure, even inappropriate. But what happened next was shocking. The priest exploded, shouting, "Sacrilege, sacrilege, sacrilege." We were all stunned, and he yelled about how in all his years as a priest he had never seen anything more sacrilegious. Keeping in mind he claimed to be an exorcist, so I guess the demons he expelled were pretty calm. He did not stop screaming for several minutes. We decided to take the children out of the church and send them to their classrooms while he continued. Frustrated, I went to speak to the school administration about the situation. Thankfully, when I arrived, he was yelling at the head coordinator about how the school was filled with evil. I told him, "I'm sorry, but don't you think if what this student did was so wrong, your reaction as a representative of God in a school should be to patiently explain why it was wrong?" He turned toward me and said, "Thank you for your opinion," then turned back to the administrator and screamed, "I will never come back to this school." We never saw him again. Story 134. I find the term homophobic offensive. I'm not scared of gay people. I just don't think they should be gay. Story 135. Besides any generic homophobic statements made during Pride and directed at me personally, when I was 11, one of my mother's friends lived with us for a while. One day, out of nowhere, she accused me of going through her things and breaking her camera. She had a cat that she kept in her room and claimed the cat knocked the camera off the nightstand. I was a well-behaved child and had an intense fear of getting in trouble and facing authority at that age, so I have no idea why she thought it was me. I obviously didn't do it, but she wouldn't listen and insisted that it just had to be me who broke it. Finally, after a few minutes, in a faux sweet voice, she said, "You know, liars burn in hell for eternity," and walked away. Again, I was 11. As a religious child, it stunned me to be threatened with hell over something I hadn't even done. Story 136. I didn't do my math homework one day in 3rd grade, so my grandma screamed at me for 5 hours about how my laziness had condemned me to an eternity in hell and that there was nothing I could do to change it. She then had her priest give a sermon about it the next time I went to church with her, just to ensure an 8-year-old knew he would be going to hell for not doing homework once. Story 137. My dad, who grew up as a traditional Catholic, told me about how he didn't like an aunt on my mom's side who wasn't religious. He didn't approve of her sexual behavior. Meanwhile, he seemed to have forgotten that he lived with a woman for a few years between his first and second wives, confessing that sin of living with her to a priest every week, who would give him one Hail Mary as penance. Story 138. That place is so terrifying and fiery, and you cannot escape as you burn indefinitely. Since you chose to live in a world separate from God, your cries will go unheard when you die. It's a frightening thought if it is true. Story 139. I will amend that. The best thing I told a born-again Christian, who I sat next to on a plane and wouldn't stop talking, was that only 30% of the world was Christian. I mentioned that more people know who Ronald McDonald is than Jesus Christ, and she became quiet. Story 140. He prayed and talked to his friends at Bible study and decided that God told him my being pregnant with his baby was my problem. By the end of that conversation, he screamed at me that if I didn't have an abortion, then my baby and I could go to hell. Yes, I terminated his parental rights. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.